I just found out my wife been secretly draining our bank account to fund her affair with my best friend 250, zero gone in 6 months. And now she's suing me for half of our house worth $1.2 million because she claims I deceived her about the inheritance I received from my grandfather. I never thought I'd be that guy who finds out his wife's been cheating on him, especially not like this. It was supposed to be a normal Saturday morning, but instead, I stumbled onto something that flipped my world upside down in a way I couldn't have imagined. The first sign was subtle. She started acting weird about money. My wife had always been a bit high maintenance, but suddenly she was more secretive than ever. I'd catch her sneaking her phone away, deleting texts, or lying about where she was going. At first, I brushed it off as just her being paranoid or maybe some new work thing she didn't want me to know about. But then came the real shocker. I was going through our bank statements because I'd been noticing some odd charges, small things at first, then bigger, more suspicious ones. It was all over the place: online shopping, luxury spa days, designer clothes, even a few high-end gadgets I knew we didn't need. But what really caught my eye was a pattern. Large withdrawals, hundreds of thousands over 6 months, all from our joint account. I couldn't believe it. I pulled up the records and started doing the math. Over $250, $0 gone just like that. I knew she was hiding something, but I didn't know what. My mind raced, trying to connect the dots. Then I remembered her phone was always full of messages from some guy named Jake. I'd seen her giggling at her phone late at night, sneaking out of bed, and I'd brushed it off as her talking to a friend or maybe a work thing. But that night, I decided to check her messages when she was in the shower. I knew I shouldn't have, but I couldn't help myself. What I saw was a flood of texts between her and Jake, flirty, suggestive, downright explicit. They were talking about meeting up, about their plans, about sex. It was like a punch in the gut. My wife was having an affair with my best friend, and they'd been doing it for months. The worst part was that I felt so betrayed, so humiliated. I'd always thought we had a good marriage, at least on the surface. But here I was, discovering that behind my back, she was cheating on me with someone I trusted implicitly. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach, then stabbed in the back. I couldn't believe she'd been lying to my face all this time, pretending to be the perfect wife while secretly screwing around. The betrayal cut so deep I almost couldn't breathe. I needed to confront her, but I didn't want to do it without a plan. I wanted to catch her in the act, get proof, and understand exactly how far she'd gone. I waited until she left for her book club that evening. Then I started digging into her emails and her social media accounts. That's when I found the next bombshell. She'd been draining our bank account to fund her affair. The money was being transferred to some bank account in her name, and I traced it back to her. I couldn't believe it. 250, zero gone in just 6 months. How could she be so reckless, so selfish? I sat there, in shock, staring at the screen, feeling like I'd been hit by a freight train. My mind was racing with questions. How long had this been going on? How much did she think she could get away with? And most of all, how could she lie to me so effortlessly? I mean, she'd always been a bitch about money, claiming she was saving us, but in reality she was just spending it all on her affair. I felt so betrayed, so angry. I wanted to scream, to hit something, to do something to make her pay. But I knew I had to stay calm, at least for now. I needed to figure out my next move. The most shocking part came when I found out she was planning to sue me for half of our house, a house worth over $1 million, claiming I deceived her about an inheritance I received from my grandfather. That was her latest lie, trying to turn the tables to make me the bad guy. I'd inherited the house after my grandfather passed, and I'd kept that detail quiet because I wanted to keep it separate from our finances. But now, she was twisting it into some deception. Honestly, I didn't even care anymore. I was just furious at how she'd manipulated everything, how she'd lied and cheated and played me for a fool. I knew I couldn't keep quiet. I had to confront her, but I also had to think about what I was going to do next. I was hurt, angry, confused, every emotion roiling inside me. I'd always believed in honesty and loyalty, and now I was faced with the harsh reality that my wife had been betraying me for months, possibly years. The trust I had in her was shattered. I didn't know what was more painful, the betrayal itself or the fact that she'd lied so effortlessly, so convincingly. I was left asking myself what I'd done wrong, but deep down I knew this wasn't about me. It was about her choices, her greed, her desire for excitement at my expense. That night I sat alone in the dark, staring at the ceiling, trying to process everything. I knew my life was about to change forever. I didn't have all the answers yet, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let her get away with it. Not without a fight. The next few days were a blur of shock, anger, and a strange numbness I couldn't shake. I kept replaying everything I'd uncovered, the texts, the bank statements, the realization that my wife had been lying to me from the start. I had always thought she was ambitious, maybe a little bitchy, but I never suspected she was capable of this level of deception. The betrayal cut so deep it felt like a physical wound. Every time I looked at her, I saw a stranger, not the woman I'd married, but someone else entirely, someone who'd been secretly plotting her own version of happiness at my expense. I spent the first night after discovering everything just staring at my phone, trying to decide how to confront her. Part of me wanted to blow up the entire house, scream at her, tell her how much I knew, but I knew that wouldn't get me anywhere. I needed a clear plan, proof, and a way to get her to admit everything. I also knew I had to be smart about how I handled this. If she was draining our money to fund her affair, then she was reckless, and she was. Also dangerous, she'd already crossed so many lines. I couldn't let her get away with it. The following morning, I decided I'd confront her face to face, but I wanted to do it in a way that left no room for her to deny the truth. I set up a hidden camera in the living room, enough to catch her in the act if she tried to lie or manipulate me again. I also made copies of all the bank statements, the texts, and the emails. I wanted everything ready to go, just in case. I knew she'd be furious when she found out I'd been digging, but I didn't care anymore. She'd lied, betrayed me, and stolen from us. She'd earned her comeuppance. When got home from her book club that evening, she looked tense. Her eyes darted around and she was unusually quiet. I didn't say a word at first. Instead, I waited. I wanted her to slip up, to reveal her guilt herself. She sat on the couch, nervously fidgeting with her phone, pretending to be innocent. I finally decided to break the silence. I said calmly, "We need to talk." She looked up at me, her face trying to act innocent but failing miserably. "What's there to talk about? I'm tired, I want to go to bed," she replied, her voice a little too high-pitched. I shook my head. "No, I think we both know what this is about the money, about Jake, about the texts." Her eyes widened and her face paled. "Jake, what are you talking about?" I pulled out my phone and played the recordings I'd made of her and Jake talking about their plans. Her face twisted into a mixture of anger and panic. "You have no right," she spat. "You've been spying on me. This is all a misunderstanding." I didn't let her finish. I just looked at her and said, "It's over. I know everything. About the affair, about draining our account, about your lies. And I know you're planning to sue me over the house because I supposedly deceived you about the inheritance. Well, guess what? You've deceived me far worse." She stood up suddenly, her voice rising. "You're crazy. I never lied about anything. You're just jealous, or maybe you're mad because I found someone better. I've been stressed, okay? Work has been tough and I needed to find some happiness. So what if I saw Jake? It's just sex. That doesn't mean I love him, it's just a fling." Her words sounded rehearsed, hollow, like she was trying to convince herself more than me. I knew better. I'd seen enough to know she was lying, trying to spin her story to save her own skin. I felt a mixture of disgust and sadness. Disgust because she'd been so manipulative, and sadness because I'd lost the woman I thought I knew. But mostly I felt angry. Angry at her for betraying me, for stealing from us, for lying so effortlessly. I told her I gathered enough evidence, and I was going to take legal action. I told her I'd report her for the bank fraud, for the affair, and I'd fight her on the house. She looked furious, then broke down into tears, claiming she'd been stressed, overwhelmed, and that she didn't mean for things to get so out of control. I let her cry for a moment, then I told her that I wasn't going to forgive her, not now, not ever. I told her I'd be talking to a lawyer first thing in the morning. That's when she snapped, calling me a controlling bastard, saying I'd ruined her life, that I'd never let her be happy. Her voice was full of venom and desperation. But I'd made up my mind. No more lies, no more secrets. I was done being the fool she'd played me for. That night I stayed awake thinking about everything. The lies, the money, the betrayal. I knew my marriage was over, but I also knew I wasn't going to let her walk away with a dime more than she deserved. I'd protect what was mine, and I'd make sure she paid for what she'd done. This wasn't just about the money or the house. It was about respect, dignity, and finally justice. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew I'd never trust her again. Not after this. And I'd make sure she realized that. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I'd been hit by a freight train. My head was pounding and my stomach was in knots. I'd spent the night drafting a plan, gathering all the evidence and mentally preparing myself for what was coming. I knew was volatile, manipulative, and capable of anything to save herself. So I kept my cool, played it smart, and stayed one step ahead. I called my lawyer first thing, and within hours we had a strategy in place. I was done being the victim. Now it was time to fight back. I also made a decision to dig into her financials even more. I wanted to know if she'd hidden any other accounts, investments, or assets. I needed a full picture of her financial deception. As I went through her emails and bank statements, I uncovered even more lies. She transferred money to few offshore accounts, accounts I hadn't known about, and had been funneling money into secret savings. She was reckless, thinking she could get away with everything. But I wasn't about to let her slip through my fingers. That afternoon, I confronted her again, this time armed with more proof. I told her I'd hired a private investigator to look into her financial affairs and her whereabouts. Her face went pale again and she started to panic. "You're overreacting," she said, trying to brush it off. "This is all just a misunderstanding. I love you and I don't want to hurt you." Her voice cracked, but I saw right through her. I knew she was lying, that she'd been lying from day one. I told her she had one last chance to come clean, to tell me everything and stop playing games. She hesitated for a long moment, then finally broke down. She admitted to the affair, the secret money transfers, and the plan to sue me over the house. She said she'd been unhappy, that I'd been distant, and that Jake made her feel alive again. I listened in silence, feeling a mix of disgust and heartbreak. I'd always tried to be a good husband, patient and supportive, but she'd thrown it all away for some fleeting thrill. I asked her why she'd done it, why she'd betrayed everything we had. She looked at me with cold, empty eyes and said, "Because I could, because I wanted more, and I don't care what you think anymore." That moment was a turning point. I realized I couldn't save this marriage, not after all the lies, the theft, and the betrayal. It was time to take control. I told her that I was filing for divorce, that I was going to fight for the house, and that I'd expose everything. I also made it clear I'd press charges for the bank fraud, for the financial deception she'd committed. I wanted her to feel the weight of her actions, to understand she couldn't just walk away scot-free. She looked furious, screaming at me, calling me controlling, accusing me of trying to ruin her life. But I didn't care. I knew I'd done everything I could to be fair, to give her a chance to come clean. But she'd chosen her path, and now she was going to face the consequences. I told her I'd be moving out soon, taking my things and starting fresh. She yelled some more, crying, cursing, trying to manipulate the situation. But I stayed firm. This was the end, and I was finally ready to walk away from the mess she'd made. In the days that followed, I kept building my case. I hired a forensic accountant to trace her money flows and prepare evidence for the legal battle ahead. I also started looking into options to protect my assets and make sure she didn't get her hands on any more of what was mine. Meanwhile, she kept trying to spin her story, insisting she'd been forced into her actions, that she'd never meant to hurt anyone. I saw right through her lies and manipulations. She was trying to save face, but it was too late. The damage was done. Throughout all this, I felt a strange mixture of relief and anger. Relief because I finally saw the truth, and anger because I'd been so blind for so long. I trusted her, loved her, and she'd repaid me with betrayal and theft. It hurt to think about the years we'd shared, the plans we'd made, now all shattered. But I also knew I had to focus on moving forward. I couldn't let her ruin me completely. I'd rebuild, stronger and wiser, knowing that I'd been betrayed by someone I thought I knew. Now, I'm in the thick of the legal process, fighting for what's mine and making sure she doesn't get away with her lies. I don't know exactly how this will end, but I do know I won't let her take everything. I've learned a hard lesson about trust and deception, and I'll never let myself be so vulnerable again. If there's one thing I want others to take from this, it's to always pay attention to the signs, protect your assets, and never ignore that gnawing feeling when something seems off. Because in the end, betrayal hurts more than I ever thought it could. After I filed for divorce and started taking concrete steps to protect myself, his behavior only got more erratic. At first, I thought she might finally realize the gravity of what she'd done, but she proved me wrong pretty quickly. Instead of facing her mistakes, she doubled down on her lies, trying to spin new stories, blaming me for everything, accusing me of controlling her, claiming I'd always been too jealous and paranoid. She even went as far as to say I was trying to trap her, that I'd always been insecure about her success and independence. Honestly, her words just made me more furious. I'd never been controlling. I was just hurt, betrayed, and looking out for what was mine. The day I received the official legal papers from her lawyer was a shocker. She was suing me for half of the house, claiming I'd deceived her about the inheritance. It was a classic move, trying to turn the tables to make me the bad guy. But I had my proof. My inheritance was clear, documented, and separate from our joint finances. Still, the fact that she thought she could get away with this kind of manipulation made my blood boil. I knew she was desperate, cornered by her own lies, and I wasn't going to let her get away with it. I hired a forensic accountant to dig deeper into her financials. Turns out, she'd been funneling even more money into secret accounts, buying luxury items and paying for Jake's trips. She'd been reckless, thinking she was invincible. The evidence was mounting, and I was slowly building a case to expose her for the thief and liar she truly was. I also contacted my own lawyer to prepare for a court battle. I wanted to make sure I had every legal angle covered, especially regarding the house and the money she'd drained. I wasn't just fighting for the property. I was fighting to keep my dignity and to prevent her from destroying what little trust I had left. Meanwhile, attempts to manipulate the situation became more aggressive. She'd call me nonstop, trying to guilt-trip me, accuse me of ruining her life and plead for me to settle quietly. She'd cry on the phone, scream in person, and even try to turn our friends and family against me. She told everyone I was a controlling, jealous husband who deceived her about the inheritance, even though I had all the proof right there. I knew she was trying to paint herself as the victim, but I refused to buy into her lies anymore. My focus was on the facts, on getting through this mess with my head held high. The most surreal moment came when she accused me of brainwashing her and said she'd been forced into her decisions. That was her way of trying to justify everything, her affair, draining our bank accounts, her lies. But I saw right through her. I knew this was just her desperation talking. She'd always been good at spinning stories, but I wasn't buying it. I had enough evidence to show she'd been planning this for months, maybe even longer. Her manipulations couldn't erase that. I was determined to see this through, to hold her accountable, and to protect what was left of my life. In the meantime, I moved out of the house, took some time to breathe, and started rebuilding my sense of stability. I got a new place, set up new accounts, and made sure my finances were secure. I cut ties with anyone who might be swayed by her stories, no more listening to her blame game or her sob stories. I had to distance myself emotionally to stay focused. I knew she'd try to manipulate the situation until the bitter end, but I wasn't going to let her. I'd learned the hard way that sometimes the best thing you can do is step back, gather your strength, and fight for what's right. Throughout all this, I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal. I'd trusted for years, shared everything with her, and she'd turned around and shredded that trust in a matter of months. It was a gut punch, one I still feel every day. But I also realized I'd been naive, too trusting, and maybe too willing to overlook her flaws. Moving forward, I knew I'd be more cautious, more guarded. I'd learned to keep a closer eye on my boundaries, especially when it came to money and who I let into my life. Now, I'm waiting for the court date to deal with the house and the financial mess. I don't know what the final outcome will be, but I do know I've done everything I can to protect myself. I've turned the page, even if it's a painful one. I've come to accept that sometimes people you love can turn into someone you barely recognize. And that betrayal, no matter how deep, can be survived. It's just a matter of standing up, fighting back, and refusing to let them define your future. I wish I'd seen the signs earlier, but at least now, I'm finally taking control of my life again. The legal proceedings dragged on for what felt like an eternity. Every day, I'd wake up wondering if this nightmare would finally end, if I'd get some clarity, some sense of justice. Of course, continued her manipulative tactics, sending me angry texts, trying to guilt me into dropping the case, claiming I was ruining her life, that I was a monster for exposing her. She even started spreading rumors among our mutual friends that I was trying to control her, that I'd betrayed her first, that I was the one at fault. But I had all the evidence and I refused to be swayed by her lies. The court date finally came and I was nervous but prepared. I sat in the courtroom, feeling a strange mixture of relief and dread. The judge listened carefully as my lawyer laid out all the evidence: the bank statements, the offshore accounts, the texts, the proof of her affair, and her attempts to manipulate the legal system. The lawyer tried to challenge everything, claiming I was a controlling husband who was trying to ruin her reputation. But the judge wasn't buying it. The evidence was overwhelming. When the judge finally delivered the verdict, I felt a huge weight lift off my shoulders. The court confirmed that I was the rightful owner of the house, that the inheritance I received was separate property, and that had no legal claim to half of it. They also ordered her to pay back the money she drained from our account, every penny, with interest. The judge made it clear that her actions were not only financially reckless, but also morally wrong. She was ordered to stay away from me and to cease any further attempts to manipulate the situation. It was a victory, but it came with a bitter taste. Was furious, screaming and crying in the courtroom, accusing everyone of conspiring against her. She called me a tyrant, a liar, a thief, anything to make herself look like the victim. I sat there silent, knowing I'd done everything I could to be fair, to be honest, and to fight for what was rightfully mine. I knew she'd never admit her wrongs, but I also knew the truth was on my side. The court's decision was clear, and I finally felt a sense of closure. After the verdict, I moved out of town temporarily to get away from the chaos. I needed space to breathe, to reflect, and to start rebuilding my life. I rented a small apartment, got a new job, and began focusing on myself. The betrayal had knocked me down, but I refused to let it define me. I learned that even in the darkest moments, there's a way to stand up again. I also realized how fragile trust really is, how easily it can be shattered by greed, lies, and selfishness. During this time, I also started therapy. Talking to someone helped me process the emotional I'd been on. I felt anger, sadness, disappointment, and relief all at once. But most of all, I felt a newfound sense of strength. I'd survived the worst betrayal I could imagine, and I was still standing. I knew it would take time to fully recover, but I was committed to healing and moving forward. Looking back, I see how much I've grown from this ordeal. I learned to trust my instincts more, to listen to that little voice warning me when something's off. I learned that money and trust are intertwined in ways I never fully understood before. And I learned that sometimes you have to fight for yourself, even when it feels like the whole world is against you. Now, I'm slowly rebuilding my life, focusing on my career, reconnecting with friends, and trying to find happiness again. The pain of betrayal will always be there, but it's also made me more cautious, more aware. I won't let anyone manipulate or deceive me again. I know what I deserve now, and I refuse to settle for anything less. Most importantly, I've come to realize that revenge isn't about getting even or hurting someone back. It's about reclaiming your power, standing up for yourself, and making sure that truth prevails. Actions taught me that, and while I wouldn't wish this experience on anyone, I can say with certainty that I'm stronger for having gone through it. I've learned that even in betrayal, there's a way to find closure, by facing the truth, fighting for what's right, and never losing sight of who you are. Now, after everything settled legally and I've had some time to reflect, I realize how much this whole ordeal has changed me. I used to think that marriage was about trust, loyalty, and building a future together. Turns out, sometimes you get by someone you thought you knew, and you have to fight hard just to keep what's yours. I've learned the hard way that money isn't just about dollars and cents. It's also about boundaries, respect, and protecting yourself from those who might want to take advantage. Looking back, I see all the signs I ignored or dismissed, those little red flags that should have warned me. Secretive behavior, her lying about money, the way she was always quick to dismiss my concerns. I wish I'd paid more attention, trusted my instincts sooner. But I also realized that no matter how much you try to protect yourself, betrayal can still find a way in. The key is what you do afterward. You can either let it destroy you or use it as a lesson to be smarter, stronger, and more cautious. I've also come to understand that revenge, in the end, isn't about hurting her back. It's about reclaiming your dignity, setting boundaries, and making sure she understands that her actions have consequences. I didn't want to stoop to her level, but I did want to make her see that her lies and deception wouldn't go unpunished. I fought for my rights, for my peace, and for my future. And I won. Not just in court, but in reclaiming my life and my self-respect. This experience has taught me a lot about human nature, about how greed, selfishness, and a desire for excitement can drive people to do terrible things. It's made me more cautious, but also more hopeful. I now know I can survive even the deepest betrayals. I've learned that sometimes you have to cut your losses and walk away, no matter how painful it is. It's better to start over than to stay in a toxic situation. That's only going to drain you further. Most importantly, I've learned to trust myself again, to listen to that little voice that warns you when something's wrong, to value honesty and loyalty above all else, and to never ignore the warning signs, no matter how small they seem. Because when everything falls apart, what remains is your integrity, your strength, and the knowledge that you fought for what was rightfully yours. In the end, I'm grateful for the lessons this ordeal has given me. It's made me more aware, more resilient, and more determined to protect myself in the future. I hope anyone reading this who's going through something similar remembers, you are stronger than you think. Don't let betrayal define you. Stand tall, fight for yourself, and never settle for anything less than the truth. Because, at the end of the day, that's what matters most: honesty, respect, and your own peace of mind.